Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Exploiting the Tangible, Hands-on Penetration Testing with the Flipper Zero. If you've been to any of our previous webcasts that Jennifer's done, and I think Travis has done some as well, you already have heard about the Flipper Zero. You know it's like having the Swiss Army knife of hacking tools in your pocket. It does almost everything, right? In a lot of ways, it's like having a video game, but in the real world, right? A controller, an Xbox controller, but for real devices in the real world. I'd like to have one in these video games, but unfortunately, I don't think it can tame dinosaurs. But that also might be just because they don't exist here. I'm a big Ark fan, and I know Jennifer is too.
Yeah, it was my most played game last year with 47% of my playtime.
Yeah, I know. That's where I was at. I'm way up there. So beyond being able to tame dinosaurs, it might have a couple other limitations. It can't do everything, just about it, though. I'm the moderator for today, Eric Keene, but the person you're really here to listen to is Jennifer Shannon. And Jennifer, from what I understand, you're going to be covering how the Flipper Zero can help with physical security testing and maybe cover some ways it can't, right?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, then go ahead. Please take it away.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. And whenever I do this, I will no longer be able to see the big marker window. So please let me know.
Yep. I will watch your questions.
Cool. Thank you. So we've named this one Exploiting the Tangible. But before any of that, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself real quick. I'm Jennifer Shannon. I'm one of the senior security consultants at Secure Ideas. I like to say that we're a worldwide company because we have like one employee in Canada, but I am based out of Jacksonville. So that means that I am one of the people that does go to our headquarters office quite regularly. I want to say the majority of our workforce is remote, so I'm just one of the ones that happens to be here. As for my background, I started Blue Team. I was a SOC analyst before I ended up moving into reverse engineering malware and doing threat intelligence. But that position slowly just became pen testing, and eventually I decided that I just wanted to do pen testing full time. So I want to say I've been doing pen test for about 8 or 9 years now, but time is ephemeral and does not mean anything. So some other interesting facts about me. I'm an all-around geek. I'm a collector of things. I don't know if you can see the wall behind me that's covered in Fallout memorabilia, but I've collect quite a few video game items, and I have more than a few anime figures in my house. I'm also a lockpick enthusiast. I am the co-leader for the local chapter of Tool. For those of you who don't know, that is the organization of open locks. It's about lock picking. So we meet on the second Friday of every month to practice lock picking. And I mention that here because it's really important. The ethics behind picking locks. We're very, very strict about which locks can and can't be picked because we don't want to damage anything. And that is very relevant whenever it comes to using the flipper for any type of physical security. Also, I might be a crazy cat lady. Whenever I started at Secure Ideas, our CEO, Kevin Johnson, said that 3 was the magic number to become a crazy cat lady. And I now have 3 cats. So I may or may not be one. I've also included this slide about what is professionally evil. For those of you who don't know, our tagline is professionally evil. And I wanted to include this again because I really want to reiterate the responsibility or responsible usage whenever it comes to the Flipper Zero. So the idea behind professionally evil, we think evil so we can understand how an attacker will behave and what they will attack. But we are still professionals. It's really important to us that everything we do with permission. All of the times that I've ever used a flipper during an engagement, it has, one, been communicated to the client. I've shown them the process. They know what to expect. And they know that I'm doing it. I'm trying not to blindside them with anything. It's really important to have that open line of communication whenever we're assessing physical security. And as far as hacking responsibly, so this is not an exhaustive list. If somebody goes out and does something crazy and tries to say, well, Jennifer didn't say this wasn't okay. What I'm really trying to push for here is best effort to not be just a jerk. So things that are okay, you can clone your own RFID or NFC tags. You can change the channels on your TV. You can use it to test your own hardware. open your own garage. And I want to give a caveat with that one, that the range on a flipper is quite wide. So you might inadvertently end up opening your neighbor's garage. But if that's, sometimes stuff like that happens. Just make a best effort to not open, somebody's garage randomly that you don't know. And opening, wow, okay. So I have opening the charging ports on the Teslas without permission. That was supposed to be with permission. That's okay to do. I do have a video later of us opening a Tesla's charging port, but the owner is somebody that we know. He was completely okay with us doing that. It's kind of a jerky thing to do if you are just running around and opening up random Tesla charging ports. Also, I think the iPhone or Apple has corrected this issue, but don't go around trying to crash random iPhones. Don't change gas prices signs. Don't try to change traffic signals. Those things are not okay, could lead to potential harm for other people. So just best case, try to use your best judgment. Try not to be a jerk. I really just want to reiterate that as much as possible.
Yep. Opening charging ports on somebody else's Tesla, if you know them, maybe, but only not everybody else's.
Yeah. So. I think Kevin has a Tesla, so if I go open his charging port, he knows that I'm just messing with him. But you very easily could get into that tricky territory. If I see a random Tesla at Target and I go open it, that owner might get mad at me, and I'm probably not going to win that fight. I'll talk big and act like I will fight everyone, but I'm 5'5". Let's be honest, I'm short. So
there was one quick question here.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one. So what about testing your own hotel card to see if it's clonable?
So for me, I would do that. That's something that I would do, because if the hotel is following proper protocols, they're supposed to be erased and reset at the end of it. So they're not the same ones over and over again. Okay. So that's a temporary one. It goes away at the end. If you clone it, they're supposed to be devalidated at the end. You shouldn't be able to go back and open that door again. If you can, probably would let the hotel know that they're messing something up along the way, though.
And so, maybe cloning your own temporarily, cloning other people's most definitely not.
Yes, yes, that is true. I also have a couple slides on, is physical security really that important? And yeah, kind of. A lot of organizations, they look at pen testing and they're like, okay, well, we tested the web apps, we tested the network, we're completely okay. But all the firewalls in the world don't mean anything if I can just walk in and walk out with your hard drive. So like with a lot of different aspects of cybersecurity, it's really cyclical in nature. It's about protecting your people, your assets, ensuring continuity, regulatory compliance, and your reputation. Oh, my mouse disappeared. So with all of that introductory stuff out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the actual flipper, which I'm sure most of you are here for. If any of you have ever seen any of the previous webcasts that we've done on the flipper, there's a lot of really good information in those. But for anybody who isn't aware, the Flipper Zero is basically, they call it a Tamagotchi for hackers. So the idea is it has the ability to perform a wide range of different tasks, such as exploring hardware, firmware. You can use it for debugging. You can use it for flashing things. Travis has a really good series on using it to perform hardware hacking. My usage of the flipper, though, very strongly relates to physical security assessments. So I'm not nearly as well versed in that part as he is, but there is a wide range of firmware. There is the factory firmware, easy updates, easy to maintain. All of these use something called a FAP, which is the Flipper application package. They're basically these different applications that can be custom made for the Flipper and loaded on so that you can give it a wider range of functionality than is present by default. So the one that I run is the Roguemaster firmware. It's Dragon Ball Z and anime themed. Everything in it is, you got a lot of Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z. So all of the cute little splash or loading screens are just that. But it has a wider range of tooling than the factory firmware does, particularly whenever it comes to dealing with key cards. And I'll dive into that a little bit later. There's also the extreme firmware. Travis uses that one, and after seeing him use it, I love it. I want to switch to it. I just haven't gotten around to switching over yet. And it's very similar to the Roguemaster. It just has a couple of extra nice additions. One thing that they found out with this one, though, is that you can get a GitHub repo age restricted, apparently. So originally when the Extreme came out, it was all very much NSFW. But as you can see in this splash screen right here, they have since fixed it so that it is now safe for work. So we got a little kitty saying, good job. But it has the bad USB, and you can do the USB and rubber ducky attacks through Bluetooth. So you don't physically have to be plugging into anything anymore. That's a very handy thing to be able to do. It has a lot nicer of a UI. I cannot state how much easier it is to navigate through the Extreme firmware versus Roguemaster or the factory firmware. And it also has the increased support for asset packs. So there's a lot more stuff that you can add into it above what's just already there in the repo. Yes.
Somebody was asking about, they're using other firmware, the Unleashed firmware. Would you suggest switching to Extreme?
So Unleashed is another good one. I do like Unleashed. I have not used it. I don't know if anybody else here has used it. I've never heard anything bad about the Unleashed. I just like the Extreme mostly for the improved UI. I don't know how the Unleashed UI looks, though.
Okay.
I will say this, though. A lot of times it really kind of comes down to what you're comfortable with. A lot of times what you learn on is, it's like the argument between Zap and Burp. If you learn on Zap, it's going to be hard to switch to Burp. And if you learn on Burp, it's going to be hard to switch to Zap. So I don't think it would hurt to try it out. But if you find that you're just less effective at it because you're not a big fan of it, then there's no harm in moving back. So, and I will go ahead and say, honestly, whenever it comes to physical security, the biggest thing that I use the Flipper for is key cards. But there are a lot of considerations to keep in mind when it comes to this. There's, as far as frequencies go, there's going to be three main things that we're really going to look at. There's the sub-gigahertz, there's RFID, and then there's NFC. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sub-gigahertz. This is any frequency that's below 1 gigahertz. And for comparison, by the way, I just want to go ahead and say that Bluetooth operates at 2.4 gigahertz and Wi-Fi usually 2.4 or 5. I've seen, there's like up to 6. There's a wide range there, but those 2.4 or 5 are going to be the ones that you will most likely see. These are very commonly used as the frequencies for controlling gates, such as outside of an apartment complex, remote control switches, doorbells, smart lights. A lot of the Internet of Things use sub-gigahertz. And the reason for this being is that they are long range and low power. So that means that they can extend very wide, even through surfaces that are usually hard to get through, like walls, and they consume almost no power. And so that's why it's preferred for these. It's also important to note, the Flipper has the built-in CC 1101 chip with radio antenna. It has the max range of 50 meters, so you don't have to be super close to somebody or something to use it. And it operates in, I've listed the frequencies here. And the reason why I've listed the frequencies is the Flipper Zero will transmit only in frequencies allowed for civilian use. There are quite a few frequencies that are restricted for some reason or another. So those are the ones that you would be allowed to use. So for the sub-gigahertz Flipper functionality, though, one of the biggest aspects or biggest bonuses for it is that it's able to read. Very frequently, and I've seen this a lot of people, you can go in and you can read the raw. Something that I see a lot is you'll be picking up a bunch of random frequencies, and very often it's just some like controller board or something that's giving that off. So sometimes it can be kind of hard to figure out what you're looking at. So reading the raw, you'll get it, you'll be able to look at it, you'll be able to analyze it, but it won't do any type of decoding. Some devices will also run on frequencies that the Flipper Zero cannot recognize. If you go to the Flipper Zero documentation for the sub-gigahertz, they have a list of supported vendors. So those are the vendors that if you're using it to analyze, your flipper will most likely automatically detect what it is. But if you're trying to copy, for instance, a remote, you're going to have to set the modulation parameters in the configuration menu when you're trying to read and decode that. I highly recommend either reading the reference manual that might come with it or trying to find online somewhere, because if you don't set these modulation parameters correctly, they're going to, it's not going to succeed in reading, decrypting, or copying. Were there any questions on that? Sub-gigahertz isn't super fun. It's not used nearly as often as other the RFID or the NFC, especially anymore. Very frequently, we're just going to see that in IoT devices. Again, you would probably be using that to take over some random projectors or something like that, but cool. So we're going to move on to RFID. For those of you who don't know, it's the radio frequency identification. All of these consist of a transponder, radio receiver, and transmitter. The transponder receives the signal and responds with a different signal. So this is the little key card reader. Usually you have the radio receiver that receives radio waves, and the transmitter, which transmits radio waves. It's pretty self-explanatory. This is very often used for access management, tracking goods, animal tags. If anybody has any pets that have been microchipped, they usually use RFID. Tolls, and well, they're used for a lot of different things. There are a few different bands for RFID. Low would be 125 kilohertz or 134 kilohertz. There's the high, which is 12.56 megahertz, and then ultra high, we're looking at 860 to 956 or megahertz. If anybody's ever used an RFID card and kind of wondered what was on the inside of it, it's an antenna. It's a little radio with the antenna. So over here, I have a picture that I found on Reddit. It's super handy. That's the little antenna for the radio that is used to transmit and receive.
There was a quick question for you going back to sub-gigahertz. So
yeah.
Going back one slide. There's a question about, have you ever used any external boards or know of external boards for sub-gigahertz work with the Flipper Zero?
Not that I know of. Travis, who's in this, might know. So if he has any, he uses a lot of the board extensions and the add-ons. I run a pretty vanilla setup with it. I will be buying one, though, later, which we will cover at the end. But I do not know off the top of my head.
Okay. So I guess follow-up for what you've done, have you needed them?
Very rarely.
Okay.
Or I guess no, since I said I don't use them. There are very few cases where I thought to myself, man, if I had this extra board, it would be super helpful. Usually, again, for what I do, these are more than enough.
Okay.
I also want to go ahead and go on record. I know that I shared those bands. Most bands for RFID are very heavily regulated, but 120 to 150 kilohertz is not regulated. So that's why you'll see that a lot for older key cards and stuff like that. So you can find all sorts of stuff there. It's really important to note that the Flipper Zero only works on the 125 kilohertz bands. It has built-in support for the H10301, EM4100, HID-PROX, and Pac Stanley cards and card readers. There's a couple of different ways of functionality for each of these as well. I'm going to use the HID-PROX because HID-PROX, if you're going to run it in any of these, it's probably going to be that one. I would also like to say that HitProx is very archaic. That came out in the 90s. It's really not used that much anymore in new implementations. If you're seeing that, it's probably a much older implementation or one that was purchased secondhand. Today's HID solutions or HID, I'm not sure how they pronounce it. They're called SEOs, and they run at 13.56 megahertz. But for each of those, there's the default files. They're going to run through all of the potential default codes that exist for that brand. You can load UIDs from a file. So if you're able to find some sort of compromise somewhere that has leaked those, then you might be able to load those and see if any of them still work. There's an additional one, which is I think it's called BF from file. It'll basically attempt the same thing, but it'll start switching bytes with zeros. So as far as fuzzing prox readers, things to keep in mind, and this also kind of comes back to the rules of the engagement, and it's why it's important to have that open communication. Many RFID readers have an auto lockout. So after too many failed attempts, they're going to start failing. There's also, it's potentially possible to brute force or fuzz. But again, if it detects, I think usually around 5 to 10 incorrect codes in a row, it might just go ahead and force you to restart. I will say if there is no lockout mechanism, though, you're going to be standing there awkwardly for several minutes. This is a video of a time that I used it on an engagement, and they actually had a couple of the default values set and active, which was just a configuration error. Whenever they were setting it up, these things should have been deactivated or devalidated and shouldn't have been allowed. But there was also no lockout feature. So I was standing there, I want to say probably 5 to 10 minutes outside of a bank in the middle of winter at like midnight. It was very suspicious looking. That was, I believe, the same bank where I was in the middle of climbing onto the roof when somebody pulled up to use the ATM. But my 30-foot ladder was blocking the ATM drive-through. So he has to pull up into like one of the adjacent like areas, and he gets out of his car and he's looking down. He's got his eyes covered like this. And he's saying, I just need to use the ATM. I don't see anything. I'll be gone. And he walks over and he uses the ATM and then he leaves. And after I got onto the roof, I sat up there for about 30 minutes waiting to see if the police were going to show up. They never did. So he was honest. He just used the ATM, didn't look at me, and didn't say anything. But luckily, sometimes we'll get lucky. We'll find these weaker configurations that can be brute forced. If you look at this one, whenever it does finally trigger to open, it is all zeros. So that really was just a configuration issue. And I do know this one was actually using the HID prox, which again, not super common anymore because of how old that technology is, but it's always fun when you do find them. We can also use it to copy key cards. This is my very manly hands, as you can tell. This works for both NFC and RFID cards, but I went ahead and included this in the little bit of a transition between RFID and NFC. In this, we have them sitting right on top of the cards to copy from one card and write it out to another card. In an engagement, you don't actually have to be that close. It's helpful. It might speed it up a little bit. So anytime I break into a building, one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking on all the desks to see if anybody's left any of their key cards out, so that way I can clone them. The flipper has the ability to emulate, so it will act as the card itself, or you can write it out to another card and use that other card instead. The last physical security engagement I went on, they were actually really strict with their key cards. If any pictures in the workplace were posted, they were not allowed to have any pictures of the key cards visible. People would get in a lot of trouble for that. And whenever I got in, I was hoping that I would be able to stand close enough to somebody for long enough to try and copy one of their cards, but nobody left them unguarded. There really wasn't a good case for me to stand close enough to somebody to try and get it that way either. We were in an area where the only place to eat was like a sit down restaurant. So I went out to lunch where the employees would go to lunch. And even with that, I wasn't able to get close enough to anyone. But if you're doing a physical engagement for a company and they're next to like a Moe's, if you're standing in that line, you very easily could probably grab one of their key cards while standing in that line. It's also important to note that as far as the fuzzing or if you're using the RFID to try and copy a card and the process fails, realistically speaking, it's probably not an RFID card. It's probably an NFC, in which case you'll just use the flipper to switch to the NFC functionality. We got any questions there before I move on to NFC?
Not yet. I'll let you know.
Awesome. NFC, boy, I know that this is just a lot of talking about key cards, and it's very fun. Before we go into that, I just want to say one of my hobbies is software-defined radios. I love radio frequencies. I love just intercepting them and looking at them. And for me, this is fun. But boy, a lot of this is key cards. So NFC is the near field communication. This is the transponder with a unique ID that has been assigned to it. So in theory, if you're able to copy it, but you don't also have the unique ID associated with it, it's not going to really work as well or at all. The UID is usually set by the manufacturer. It's important to note that there are special NFC cards that are the UID itself is rewritable. So these work at the 13.56 megahertz frequency band as well. Usually I see NFC being used for virtual business cards, smart locks, key cards are not uncommon, even though I think we see RFID slightly more there. They're very common for payment. My watch has NFC in it, and so does my phone. And very frequently I will be on an engagement and I'll have to remember to turn off my watch because I'll start picking that up if I'm trying to read random NFC. But there's also quite a few times where I'll be on my phone and it gets slightly too close to my watch and it's like paired to this random device. And I'm like, what device is this? It's my watch. It was trying to read my watch for some reason. I think Amiibos, so anybody who uses the switches, I think those also use the NFC. And I will be honest and say that I have definitely cloned quite a few of those with my flipper. Flippers can emulate the NFC cards or just the UID. It is really important to note that there are some use cases for NFC cards where the flipper is just not going to be as effective. Hotel cards, these very frequently are NFC. Like I said, we talked earlier about how you can use it for that. Travis mentioned that the nested attack takes really good care of this because a big part of NFC is part of this is always going to be encrypted. For the Mifare, I'm mentioning this one. This is a specific use case that the flipper actually has functionality for. There are a few other things that it can do as well, but the Mifare is a contactless IC payment. It's used for it's IC payments. They have the classic, but it can only copy or emulate the unlocked sectors only. There's also the ultralight and N-tag. There's quite a few more restrictions with that one, but it's possible to do. And then there's the DesFire. In that case, it can't get the transmission itself. It can only emulate the UID.
Since you're still on NFC, somebody was wondering about the NFC cards with rewritable UIDs. Are those the Chinese magic cards, or were you talking about?
Yes, those one of the more common ones are the Chinese magic cards for the rewritable. There's another one, and I cannot remember what it is right off the top of my head for the specific use case for them. They're not going to be ones I think that you encounter too terribly often. But yes, the magic cards are definitely one of the ones that are rewritable.
Cool.
So some other functionalities. Travis and I have both started using the flipper as a TV remote. I don't know about you guys. I'm really bad at losing TV remotes like all the time. I have programmed it to do that. But also during a physical security assessment, there have been times where I have needed, or it might be necessary to create some sort of distraction. So if you start flipping through the channels quite rapidly on a TV that's in the area that everybody's in, they're all probably going to look at that one. I will say, quite recently, I was on a physical test and they had hid sensors, but none of them were going to be brute forceable by me. They mentioned that they all had rolling codes anyways. So brute forcing them was probably going to either lock me out or lock somebody else out entirely. Two things that made that test successful, though. One, I was able to crawl underneath the kiosk to get into the building. They were very strict with the egress and ingress of the building. You had to scan your card to get in, and you also had to scan your card to get out. But a couple of them were installed slightly too high, and I was able to get under them. I did need a distraction, though, because I did at one point crawl underneath the kiosk while there were people in that room. And I don't know if I've ever held my breath for that long because I did bump the kiosk at one point and it made quite a bit of noise. But again, thanks to a very handy distraction, such as, switching the TV to static instead of displaying the current temperature, gave me just enough time to get underneath that kiosk and get into the building and then go around and let my coworker into another area. The other saving grace of that is the visitor badges. I was actually, while the employees themselves were really strict with it, the visitor badges had a designated area to be thrown away in. And some of them were on a really tight lockbox that I just wouldn't have been able to get into. And some of the other ones, I was actually able to reach my whole hand inside and grab a couple of those. While they did devalidate them after a certain amount of time, there was still that short window where they were able to be used to get in and out of certain areas of the building. And again, using the flipper, it was easy for me to just copy that and share that with my coworker. So that way, if we needed to, we could split up. Or there were a couple of times where we got locked into, for instance, there was this delivery area, which you had to have a key card to get in. And somebody had opened the door and the doors took a really long time to close. So I walked in. And as it turns out, you needed the key card to get out. And I was stuck there for about 30 minutes before a random person came by. And I was like, hey, I don't know how I got in here. Can you let me back in? And they let me back in.
I could think of not on a physical pen test when I wish I had this as a remote. Like when I go to the hotel, and you need to change the settings on the TV because they look so bad. But you can't, they give you that horrible little other remote. Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, I use it for a remote, unfortunately, unless I'm on a physical engagement. I think the thing that mine is most commonly used for is remote. Hilariously, like I said, I'm really bad about losing remotes. And this morning I had to tear my house apart looking for my flipper because I thought I knew where it was and I did not. So that happens. Also, here's just a fun little video we grabbed this morning, again, with my very manly hands. Actually, Travis is my hand model in this case, but this was the Tesla that we were able to open. It was super easy. All you have to do is make sure that module's there and it just does it. But again, there was one time we had visitors at the office, and I don't remember exactly how many of them had Teslas, but there was a total of like 3 Teslas in our parking lot, and we were trying to just open one, and we opened all 3 of them on accident. So again, keep in mind, the range on these can be quite far. We were able to open them from upstairs and inside our building. So you don't even have to be right there to do it.
Now, did you have a frequency to close them as well?
I don't know. We just pushed on it and it closed itself. I don't drive a Tesla. So I don't know if I thought for some reason that you just manually closed them once you were done charging. I don't know if there is one is there one to close it? We'll have to find a Tesla driver later to find out.
I'll talk to Jason or Kevin later today and see.
And so I've got this one. This one is just a little bit of fun. And I'm sorry, I found out about this today, and I was really excited about this. They're in the there is the ability to add a Geiger counter. And you'll see above it, there's the atomic dice roll, which apparently uses the ambient radiation level to seed dice rolling, which is really cool. But I was really excited about the Geiger counter aspect because for those of you who don't know, I have this weird fixation in industrial incidents, particularly really like the oil and nuclear industries, and I spend entirely too much time reading about those things. So whenever I found out that one, I have Geiger counters because of course I do. Anybody who's ever been to an antique store and seen that like green glass, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, that's called uranium glass. It is radioactive. If you do have any, it's highly recommended you store it in a glass cabinet because the glass itself is enough to kind of contain the radiation, but they are radioactive. So I was really excited when I found this out. It requires the J305 module, which I don't have a picture of. It's just a little gamma gas tube that it uses to measure radiation. You'll need to set at the conversion factor, I think, for the source file, because if you don't set the conversion factor correctly, if you're switching between sieverts versus roentgens, which are the two most common ways to read radiation, there can be false measurements given as a result of that. And it's also important to note that it can only detect beta and gamma rays. Alpha rays can't be detected. I know, fun. But after I found out about this module, I went and looked, and you can use it to determine if their uranium glass at an antique store is actual uranium glass. So I guess technically that counts for physical security, though, because maybe we don't want to be taking home random radioactive sources.
I don't know. Sometimes, no. Yeah, right. No. Everybody hulks out. Wait, never mind.
Yes. And if I remember correctly, it gets like the most common forms of radiation. But I can't say for sure which ones it does and does get. I just know that it acts as a Geiger counter, and that was unnecessarily fun for me to find out. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do with the flipper. Whenever you go look at any of the module boards, there's developer boards. I had one somewhere that I cannot find at this exact moment. A lot of tools like these are available for the flipper. For example, by the way, I found out that J305 module is available on AliExpress, which is not where I thought I would be going to buy anything for my flipper. GitHub's also a fantastic resource if you're looking for additional functionality for the flippers as well. Also, something to keep in mind, the flipper originally was meant to have a lot more functionality, especially whenever it comes to radio frequency. But compliance and regulations kind of force them to take out a lot of that. Some of it is region locked. So whenever you first get a flipper or you're setting it up, you have to set your region. There are some frequencies available to countries outside of the United States that we would not have access to here, and vice versa. So if you need it for something other than that, in theory, you could just switch your region. But I also want to give the caveat, please be careful with that. There's a reason why a lot of these frequencies and bands are highly regulated, because they could interfere with some actual sensitive technologies or communications. So again, best effort to not be a jerk as far as that goes.
And since you don't necessarily know what you're going to be doing, right? The last thing you want to do is cause some denial of service on something that might be very important. Forget the reading sensitive information. You might inadvertently take something down that you didn't want to do.
It's really important that, again, that's why I brought up tool and I brought up the professionally evil part. Mm-hmm. We don't do any form of testing that would be destructive in nature. Technically, every window can be opened once. Even the ones that aren't supposed to be opened, if I throw a rock at it, I can get in. But we're not here to do that. We're here to really kind of assess, are there weaknesses, such as those default configurations? Mm-hmm. or employees that haven't been trained well enough on how to handle their badges.
Which is also kind of going back to that whole, cloning your hotel card, your own hotel card.
Yeah.
Regardless of how Jennifer or I or anybody feels about it, if the hotel sees you doing it and then using your Flipper Zero to open a door, they might have a very different perspective than anybody else. And as a guest at their hotel, they may have a different thought of how this looks and what's happening. So just because you might clone your own card doesn't mean that everybody feels the same way, and you should be very, very careful with what you're doing, right? We're not condoning you going out and cloning everything in the world. Definitely not. That goes against the whole professional and be responsible aspect.
And in a lot of cases, my understanding, especially whenever it comes to intercepting, I know, again, Travis uses it a lot to start doing packet captures or just looking at the traffic that's around them. In most cases, just reading what's going on around you or looking at it isn't a problem. You could probably even save and analyze it and try and figure out what's going on there. But whenever you start trying to emulate or tamper with or change in some way, that's when you're really kind of getting in that's a step too far territory.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I will say we're at the questions phase of this. So here is my contact information, or if anybody ever has any questions at all, I am more than happy. For instance, if you start messing with it and you run into an issue, feel free to send me an email at any point. I do my best to answer. Or if you need a different question answered, feel free to reach out at info@secure-ideas. These are my cats, Andromeda, Nix, and Pluto, and they do not have contact information. I don't know how you can email them. I'm not sure they know how to use a computer.
Just imagine if they did. Although my favorite GIF to upload into apps is the cat on the computer. That's my favorite.
Oh, yes, for sure. I will say the one in the bottom right, that's Andromeda, and she gets really grumpy with me if I'm on a meeting and I don't have the extra chair pulled up next to me for her to sit in. So if I don't have an extra chair next to me, she actually gets up in the camera until I move the chair over. So she has to be watching me work or her day is not complete.
Perfect. So Thomas asked a question. This is a great lead in. So we'll kind of continue on here. So when's the next follow-up webinar? Well, I don't know when the next Flipper Zero webinar is actually going to be out there, but Jennifer is going to be back in 2 weeks to talk about one of her favorite interests there. The webcast is what? Oil, circuits, and cheese?
Yes. We'll be talking about something called the Swiss cheese model of error, which is the idea that no layer of security is 100%. And there's small holes in each layer of security. Sometimes catastrophe doesn't happen just because one layer fails. It happens because all of those minor holes line up just right for a catastrophe to happen. So just like on an oil rig where a lot of small things have to go wrong for something to sink, actual compromises, a lot of small things have to happen before they can actually be compromised.
And then I think you're also teaching in 2 weeks. The same. So you're going to teach and then do a webcast.
Yes.
You are just all over it. So
I have 3 days of PEAS, which is the professionally evil application security. It's about pen testing applications, heavy focus on server side and client side, and I think also reconnaissance. So if you're looking to get any type of web app or application pen testing experience, that's a great class to take. There's 3 of them, so there's 3 days, and that is available on Anti-Siphon.
And then we are going to have more webcasts throughout the year. We're working on finalizing that schedule and who's going to be talking when. And then when's your first conference, actually? Do you know?
I don't know yet. I don't know.
We're still waiting for everybody to say yes. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I know I just got off like 3 months of straight conferences. So I've submitted a bunch of talks. So now we're waiting for more talks. But I do know there's quite a few conferences that we'll probably be going to this year.
Oh, yes. Well, we will be all over the U.S.
So. And I know Travis is actively working on the part 2 of hardware hacking with the Flipper Zero. In my opinion, that one is super interesting, especially my background is, again, in reverse engineering malware or tearing stuff apart or breaking things. I don't have the depth of knowledge that Travis has for the hardware components is just amazing. So I highly recommend checking those out.
Perfect. And we'll get that schedule out as soon as we finalize it. Oh, Travis says we're going to get into JTAG stuff.
Ooh.
Nice. All right. Well, unless we see a question pop up, I want to thank you very much, Jennifer. Definitely appreciate it. And I know, as you said, spent lots of time talking about key cards, but
yes,
kind of like user IDs and passwords, that is like the first layer of security there.
It is
so,
the biggest issue, honestly, whenever it comes to any type of physical security, beside employee training, is very much access control. And you'll find a recurring theme with any type of pen test. A lot of it, I think, most of the API top 10 are authorization or authentication issues. So very much the same with physical security. I'm just trying to find ways to get in and pretend like I'm somebody that I'm not.
Perfect. All right. Well, then, thank you again. Without any questions, I'm going to stop the recording. Appreciate everybody attending and listening. And we look forward to seeing you again in the near future.